familiar to a lot of comics fans. I mean, comics historians will point out that he was also the co-creator of Our Man, another DC Golden Age great. I just feel that not enough people recognize that name. I think that's a shame, given that he co-created two well-received Golden Age characters who, are now past 75 years of age. The Spectre's original home was over in the More Fun Comics title. More Fun Comics has a very important place in comic book history. This was the first publication to feature entirely original comics work. Prior to that, comic books were simply reprinting strips which appeared, I guess, in newspapers and magazines, but More Fun Comics, which actually began life as New Fun Comics, was the first to feature entirely new comics work, both in traditional comics form and there are also prose stories as well, which appeared in More Fun Comics. This was also, I want to say, the first comic which came to be referred to as a DC publication. It's interesting when you look at More Fun Comics over the years, and in time there were advertisements for other national or DC publications like Superman and Batman. And I've got to say, I find it a crime that More Fun Comics has not been collected in an omnibus or a series of showcase presents. Given its place in comic book history, given the fact that a number of iconic characters, such as the Spectre, Dr. Fate, Green Arrow, Aquaman, Superboy, were introduced there, this is a series which should, at the very least, be collected in digital form. And I think that's why we haven't seen any Spectre podcasts out there, because there is a lack, or at the very least a perceived lack, of access to reprintings or collections of these Golden Age stories. There were the Golden Age archives. I want to say there was a Spectre archive that was printed a number of years ago, but those books are long enough print, and those archives, they look beautiful, but they were so expensive when they were first released. And even on the secondary market now, you're looking at putting down a significant chunk of change for those archives for pretty well any character, any title. I thought it was really great when DC was printing the Chronicles. Those were full color reprintings in softcover format, very affordable. And of course, they started off with the Trinity, and then they started off with the Hal Jordan Green Lantern, skipping over Alan Scott. And I think DC reached a point where it fell a bit off more than it could chew, and so it had to cut back on its various reprintings and collections. It's just such a shame that characters like the Spectre haven't been reprinted or collected as much as other characters. And so it does seem like a daunting task for a lot of podcasters to do a spotlight series when you can't easily pick up issues of 75-year plus old comics for a couple of dollars, or for $10-15 in a trade. Now, there are sites out there where you can read all of More Fun Comics for free online. I'm not going to mention any of those websites here, though, because I fear that they're not entirely legal. These don't appear to be done in association with DC Comics. They look like very well scanned images of the original comics, page by page scans. I mean, whoever is behind these sites has put in a lot of work. But again, because I don't think it's legal, I don't think that the original creators or their estates will get anything out of this. I don't want to mention those here online. Let's just say, there are search engines out there, and if you type in certain keywords, you'll find out how to read Morphin Comics and the Spectre online. Okay, I'll be back in a second to talk about the Spectre's origin, which ran in Morphin Comics issues 52 through 54. All right, folks, I'm back, and you heard it right. The Spectre's origin ran over the course of 3 issues of Morphin Comics, numbers 52 through 54. Issue 52 came out in February of 1940. Morphin Comics at this time was a bi-monthly title, so this full origin would have unfolded for readers over the course of 6 months. So we're introduced to hard-boiled police detective Jim Corrigan. He lives in a boarding house. He shares a room with his friend and partner on the force, Wayne Grant, and they're getting up to some shenanigans in the room. And Wayne asks Jim how such a lovely, beautiful, wealthy young socialite as Miss Clarice Winston would want to marry a mook like Jim Corrigan. And Corrigan says, yeah, I'm really lucky and I'm off to see her tonight for a party. But first, Jim is approached by one of his informants, one of his stool pigeons, who tells him that local crime boss Gat Benson's men are about to pull off a heist that night. And so even though Jim is supposed to go to Clarice's house to pick her up and go to a party with her, he decides to follow through on the stool pigeon's information, and he takes a side trip where he sees that Benson's men are indeed pulling a heist at a warehouse. They're trying to lift several items, put them in a truck. Corrigan takes them both down, manages to keep his hair neatly coiffed, heads back to Clarice's house, and Clarice lives with her mother. And her mother is not pleased. She does not like Jim very much. She doesn't understand why her daughter loves this man so much when he stands her up. And Clarice, we see that she's not going out with Jim just for his rugged good looks. It's certainly not for money, and she's certainly not a naive person. Rather, Clarice comes across as just a really sweet, a real sweetheart. She has this really kind soul to her, and she's concerned for Jim. She actually calls Wayne and calls into the precinct trying to find out where Jim is. But he shows up at the door. He says, "Oh, doll, don't you worry. I just had some business to take care of. Bye, Mrs. Winston." And he and Clarice go out for a drive. And Clarice is expressing her concern to Jim. She was really worried about where he was. And he says, "Well, I had business. I had to take down Gat Benson's men. I've been tracking Benson for all this time. I'm getting closer to him. And speak of the devil," Jim's car gets drawn over to the side of the road by 2 other cars, and out step Gat Benson and his men. And they force Jim and Clarice to come out of their car at gunpoint. Clarice is quickly tied up and thrown into one of Benson's cars. Jim tries to fight off Benson's men, but they eventually overpower him. They toss him into a large barrel, and they start filling it with liquid cement. And as the barrel is being filled with cement, Corrigan rages at Benson and says, "Benson, I will have my vengeance upon you, I swear." And Benson scoffs and says, "What, really? Look at you. You're being buried in cement. If the cement doesn't kill you, being thrown into the river and drowning is certainly going to kill you." And so that's what happens. Benson gets into the car with Clarice, drives off, while Benson's men close up the barrel and throw it over the river. And then they drive off to Benson's hideaway. We see that the barrel falls to the bottom of the river, and after a point we see Jim Corrigan's spirit rise out of the barrel. And Corrigan's spirit wonders, what's going on? What is this? And he's drawn upwards into the sky as the light opens, and Corrigan says, "This is it. I'm going to my eternal rest. All right." But then a disembodied voice makes its presence felt. Aha! See how I did that? Voice, presence, Spectre fans inside joke there? Yeah. So this voice addresses Corrigan and says, "Jim Corrigan, you will not be allowed to enter the afterlife. You will not earn your eternal rest until after you have eradicated all evil from the earth, and I am now sending you back." And so Corrigan's spirit makes a rapid descent, goes back to the bottom of the river, where Corrigan in spirit form sees the barrel, and it's opened in part, and an arm is coming out of the barrel. And Corrigan says, "Oh my, I'm not dreaming. This is real. I'm dead. Benson and his men killed me. Now I'm going to have my vengeance upon them." And he discovers that as a spirit, he's able to levitate, and so he comes out of the river and he starts floating through on land, heading out in search of Benson and his headquarters. And that ends part 1 of the Spectre's origin. Then in More Fun Comics, number 53, we see Corrigan make his way to Benson's hideout. Now, of course, in later decades, it would be established that amongst the Spectre's many powers was this ability to know all and to see all. But that really wasn't established during the Golden Age. Certainly, Corrigan may have learned about the location of Benson's hideout from one of his informants, but I also think that somewhere off panel, Corrigan discovered that he had this ability to see all and know all, and so he was able to just think about it, and the location of Benson's hideaway came to his mind. But in any event, Corrigan makes it to the hideout. He materializes through one of the walls, taking Benson's men by complete surprise. Amongst his powers, we see that Corrigan has a death stare. Things go dark, and he has this penetrating look, and it kills one of Benson's men. And then we also see that Corrigan has the ability to deliver pretty brutal punishment, and that there's this twisted sense of humor behind the forms of punishment which he doles out. He turns one of Benson's men into a living skeleton, but it's not just with a flip of the fingers. Rather, the henchman's skin dissolves, disintegrates, decays. And so this is very painful for his henchman. And finally, when he's in skeletal form, he's still alive. He's completely aware of what happened to him, and he's in complete shock. And then Corrigan, who still appears in human form, wearing his fancy suit, addresses Benson, and he has a confrontation with Benson, which, of course, Benson goes down. But in the skirmish, a shot is fired, and it hits Clarice, and she dies. And so Jim quickly rushes to her. He